Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is our clay techniques and terminology video. Today we are going to take notes on some basic clay techniques and some basic clay terminology. Afterwards, you are going to watch a second video that will walk you through any specific skills that you need for the clay unit that we are doing this year. So, first, once you get your clay out of the clay bin, the first thing you need to do is knead it. And that is spelled like kneading bread. K-N-E-A-D. Kneading the clay kind of does the opposite of what kneading bread does. It gets rid of air bubbles. Air bubbles are very bad for clay because when we put it in the kiln and the clay gets really super hot, what happens to the air bubbles that are in the clay is they expand and then they cause your piece to blow up or crack because the air's got to get out somehow. So, this piece of clay has not been in the clay bin very long. It's very kind of smooth. So as I'm banging it in my hand and I'm cupping my hand so that I'm not flattening it too much because I kind of want to keep it round for what we're going to do today. And then I don't have any cracks in my clay. That means I have gotten rid of all the air bubbles and it's kind of stopped being quite as smushy. So I have kneaded my clay and it's ready to go. The next thing, I'm going to take a little piece of this clay out to show you the next technique, which is coil. So coils are little clay snakes. You can get them by rolling. You'll notice that I don't tend to work too much with clay on the table because the paper will pull the water out of the clay. My hands pull a lot less water out of the clay. So things you want to keep kind of in your hands so that the clay keeps as wet as possible. Clay is more workable when wet. As it dries out, it becomes very difficult to work with. But I can roll it on the table very lightly with my hand until I've got a coil. Now, all clay, when working with it, needs to be as thick as your pinky. If clay is too thin, once it dries, it becomes super fragile, and when we put it in the kiln, it may break. If clay is too thick, it doesn't dry out enough when we put it in the kiln. And then there's water inside. That water, when it gets heated, it becomes air, and then you have air bubbles in your clay. So then you have something that explodes. So what you can do with coils is you can kind of stack them and ground them around each other to create things. Now, if I put this clay together like this and I just smush it, it's not actually attached. I can just pull it back apart. In order to attach two pieces of clay, what you need to do first, the next turn, which is our next term, you need to take a clay tool and you need to score the clay. That means put little marks in the clay to rough up the surface of it. This is giving a surface or a texture for the next step to sit in. So the first step in connecting clay is to score, which is to put little marks in the clay. Then, after scoring, the next step is to add slip. Now, slip is clay glue. It is really just dried clay mixed with water so that it's very sticky, very watery clay. Now, the drier your regular clay is, the more slip you need. The wetter your regular clay is, the less slip you need. If you're working with really super wet clay, you don't really need that much slip, because the clay itself is already kind of acting like slip. So the second step to connecting two pieces of clay is to slip. So you're going to score, then you're going to slip, and then you're going to do the last step, which is what I'm doing right now, which is smooth. Smoothing the clay is pushing those two pieces of clay together so that the clay thinks it's one big piece. Anywhere where you can see a crack in the clay, that's where the clay is going to want to crack. Clay has kind of a memory that way. It remembers that it was two pieces of clay, so you've got to kind of confuse it. You've got to make it think that it's all one. So you've got to smooth it so that you cannot see that crack. Once you've smoothed it together, you've got one piece of clay. The clay realizes it's one, and then this piece will not come apart. I can't pull it apart because it's all connected. So in order to attach two pieces of clay, you always have to score, slip, and smooth. All right, so another way of building with clay is to create slabs. Now, slabs are flattened pieces of clay. Now you can flatten them, kind of pancake it between your hands. That's one way to do it. You can also use a rolling pin. When using a rolling pin, you want to work very lightly and very kind of softly to go in different directions. You want to pull it in different directions so that the clay stretches kind of evenly. So with this, you've got to remember, how thick can clay be? As thick as your finger. So if it gets too thin, your slab is not going to be very strong. If it gets too thick, your slab is not going to dry out enough. All right. The last technique I'm going to show you is going to be to pinch. Now, one thing, and I'll re-knead this clay because I've kind of added a couple air bubbles to it by pulling it off my big piece. Anytime that you kind of put pieces of clay back together, like you've separated them and then you want to put them back together, you have to knead them. So kneading the clay is going to happen quite frequently. Once you've re-kneaded your clay, what a pinch does is you can pinch the clay between your fingers. You can use this to create all sorts of forms. Now this clay here is a little bit on the dry side, so when I'm pinching, you're noticing that it's getting some cracks. So what I can do with any cracks that I get, I can add a very little bit amount of slit into them. If it starts majorly cracking, because your clay is way too dry, trade your clay in for another piece. So I can pinch and create like little pinch pots that can help me create circles and ovals. So, all right, we have all of our clay terminology done in this video. So now go watch the video for your clay project.